Good evening, everyone. My name is Johanna, and I'm the Public Programs Manager at SAMA. Without further ado, I'm introducing the AT&T Director of Education, Diversity, and Inclusion, Bella Merriam.
Thank you, Johanna, and welcome, everyone. The San Antonio Museum of Art is mindful of our location on the ancestral lands of the first peoples of this area, including Ixtocna, Carrizo Comecrudo Tribe of Texas, the Tehuan Band of Mission Indians, the Tapilam Coahuiltecan Nation, and the many other local Native peoples whose names and contributions have been erased over time, including migratory peoples of Samanahoac. We also remember those of indigenous descent who continue to migrate as an ancestral right that predates imposed borders. We recognize the many diverse autochthonous peoples still connected to this sacred land and living creation, and all walks of life that are inhabitants of the sky, earth, and water along the Yanawana River. We pay our highest respects to these communities and honor their histories, continued presence, and legacies in San Antonio as a means of recognizing the truth and complexity of this Somasek, vast lands history. We commit to continued dialogue and thoughtful presentation of the cultural resources of autochthonous, Native, and Indigenous peoples from all over the world in our collections, exhibitions, and programs. It is my distinct honor to introduce Hak-E-A-V, Edgar Heap of Birds, tonight. And on behalf of the San Antonio Museum of Art, we are very happy to have him speak about his artistic practice. This lecture is generously sponsored by the Louis A. and Francis B. Wagner Lecture Fund. And we are so pleased that we have recently added one of Edgar Heap of Birds' recent works, Trail of Tears, created in 2005, to our collection. This recent acquisition reflects our ongoing commitment to building the diversity of artists represented in our contemporary art collection. Supported by the generosity of the Brown Foundation and guided by our interim chief curator and the Brown Foundation curator of modern and contemporary art, Suzanne Weaver, SAMA has been focused on increasing the number of contemporary Black, Latinx, Native American, and Indigenous artists represented in our collection. We are excited about additional upcoming acquisitions that will further diversify our collection and move us forward as an equitable and inclusive museum. Having Edgar Heap of Birds here with us tonight in celebration of Native American Heritage Month is part of that momentum also. The artworks of Hak-E-A-V, Edgar Heap of Birds, include multidisciplinary forms of public art messages, large-scale drawings, Nerf Series acrylic paintings, prints, works in glass, and monumental porcelain enamel on steel outdoor sculpture. He was recently named a USA Ford Fellow in 2012 and Distinguished Alumni of the University of Kansas in 2014. The artist has studied at the University of Kansas, the Royal College of Art in London, and Tyler School of Art in Philadelphia. He holds honorary Doctor of Fine Arts and Letters degrees awarded by the Massachusetts College of Art and Design, the Emily Carr University of Art and Design in Vancouver, and the California Institute of the Arts. Heap of Birds has exhibited his works internationally at many important museums and venues, from Paris to Indonesia and from Germany to Hong Kong, including the National Gallery of Ottawa, the Cheyenne and Arapaho Nations Reservation in Oklahoma, the Museum of Contemporary Art in Sydney, the Grand Palais in Paris, and the Venice Biennale. The artist's works are in numerous important collections, including the Whitney Museum of American Art, MoMA, and the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York, the Walker Art Center, Denver Art Museum, Museum of Contemporary Native American Art in Santa Fe, the Smithsonian Institution in Washington, D.C., and the British Museum of London. He has served as an international visiting lecturer in many countries and has taught at Yale, the Rhode Island School of Design, and at the University of Oklahoma, where he is now Professor Emeritus. His many prestigious public art and studio projects have received significant grants and awards, including the National Endowment for the Arts, Andy Warhol Foundation, and the Wallace Foundation, among others. His artistic creations and efforts as an advocate for Indigenous communities worldwide are focused first upon social justice, and then the personal freedom to live within the tribal circle as an expressive individual. Recently, Heap of Birds was elected to the American Academy of Arts and Sciences for 2020. Please join me in extending a warm virtual welcome to Edgar Heap of Birds.
Okay, thank you for the introduction. Thanks for the welcome, everybody. Hello, good evening to the audience. We're going to work on this lecture tonight called Spirit Citizen, and I'll be showing work from my studio practice, public art practice, also historical legacy and issues from the Cheyenne Nation and other tribal nations. My first slide here is of the horizon. The sun just set here in Oklahoma. I'm on the western part of Oklahoma City, very near the Cheyenne Reservation tonight. That's where I live. I was watching the sun setting just a few minutes ago outside. I came in. My first thought is to certainly acknowledge the horizon, and that has been a huge impact on my practice. But you also see that in my grandmother's beadwork and most Cheyenne Arapaho artwork, the horizon and the geometry of that sky and land will be replicated and acknowledged in their artwork. So this line and this geometry is something I want you to hold in your minds. Okay, next please. With all my talks, I dedicate the lecture to indigenous women, and this is my grandmother, Ho'etziaw, Lightning Woman, Heap of Birds. As a young mother, she's holding her daughter, my aunt, in western Oklahoma on the Cheyenne Reservation. Many years ago, probably in the 40s, I guess this photograph was taken. Her English name was Alice Heap of Birds. And my daughter, who you'll see later in the talk, carries her name, Ho'etziaw, or Lightning Woman. So that's the first slide I wanted to acknowledge for Native women. Okay, next. And this fast forwards to 1980, and this is Ho'etziaw and myself. She has passed now, as has my aunt, and this is in my studio on the reservation around 1980, somewhere in there. And there's jokingly, I would say, there's a young man looks a lot like me in the picture, a little bit different now. But my grandmother actually physically stood with me to take this photograph. And so those are my word pieces on the wall, unlike folkloric distraction, possible lives. And but she was very supportive, and she had a cane, you know, she had trouble walking. She's probably in her 80s on that day. But she actually stood there with a view camera photograph on a plate. So it took hours to make this shot. And but she had that kind of support from me. And the words themselves, you know, speak to this talk tonight of how natives are unlike a folkloric distraction. And we've been disserved by folklorica in America with native lives. Okay, next, please. This is one of my favorite photographs, and it was given to me by my another grandmother, Sarah Heap of Birds Bent. And this photograph is so old that my grandmother who gave me the photograph wasn't born yet. So she would be another young lady in the picture. The lady in the center is Grace Big Bear, the mother of the family. And then to the left is Black Wolf Heap of Birds. His father was many magpies, Moyuhanhaskus magpies, one of the 4 principal chiefs of the Cheyenne Nation. Black Wolf became the headsman of the Elk Warrior Society, and he has the pipe in his hand, the ceremonial pipe. And now I'm one of the leaders of the Elk Warrior Society. To his left, or to my left, in the picture is Guy Heap of Birds with the headdress on, and he's my grandfather, and he would grow up and marry Lightning Woman. So I have this this connection with my family and the traditions, and so this is probably the most important activity I have, or priority, is to be a ceremonial leader of the tribe. Okay, next. I've had great mentors. I've gone to very important art schools and met important artists of my lifetime. And then now I'm a mentor to many other artists. This is a sculpture by Black Bear Boson, who is Kiowa Comanche from Oklahoma. And he did most of his major work in Wichita, Kansas. And that's where I grew up, was Wichita, Kansas. Many of the native people, there's almost 40 tribes in Oklahoma that were relocated here, forcibly brought here to Oklahoma. And many of them had to travel to Kansas to work in the aircraft factories during World War II and during the Cold War. And Black Bear was one of those workers, and my father was too. So that brought many tribal people to the urban area of Wichita, Kansas. Okay, next, please. Here's Black Bear painting a really wonderful mural from Whence All Life. And you can find this mural in a bank building along the river in Wichita, Kansas. Black Bear was a self-taught artist. He was not from art school. And he came up through being a commercial artist and designer, then had his own studio, also sold jewelry, retail native jewelry, but he was a leader in the community in Wichita, Kansas, a board member of the American Indian All Indian Center, Urban Center. So he showed us a lot. He showed us how to be a leader, how to be a civic-minded person. The community was very important to him. So I really have a lot of respect for his life. He passed also when he was about 57. Okay, next, please. This is probably one of his most well-known paintings. It's called Prairie Fire. And this stance of having unity with the earth, the animals, the people on the horses, also the flames in the sky, all these beings exist in the same kind of experience. And so there wasn't a hierarchy from his perspective. And so even the flames themselves are very beautiful. So that's something I carry with me. And also from a ceremonial perspective, the linkage and the parity that we all should share with the earth. Okay, next, please. This is my first painting I probably created as an art student at the University of Kansas in 1972 to 1976. My Bachelor of Fine Arts degree was at KU. And this is probably my second year, maybe a sophomore, in painting. It's a 6 foot by 6 foot canvas. And again, I go back and mentally to the first slide I showed you of the horizon. That has a big impact on this work. Although I'm thinking of it without kind of laboring the point, it's just very subliminal. But that's my first painting. Next, please. Another mentor that I was privileged to have was Don Secondine, who was a Lenape, Delaware artist. He was a fellow student at KU. He had also attended Haskell Institute, which was a junior college at the time. Now it's a 4-year college. His professor was Dr. Dick West Sr., a Cheyenne painter, figurative painter. We call him Dr. West. And I actually took a class with him as well at Haskell. But Don was married to a Kiowa woman who was a Chano from Anadarko, Oklahoma. And her mother had recently died in around 1975. Don and I were in a landscape painting class. And so people were doing easel paintings out on the Kansas prairie. But we didn't really want to paint, easel work. We wanted to do more exploratory work. And so we made earthworks in the landscape painting class. And Don wanted to make a memorial to the old lady, the elder Kiowa woman, Chano. And so we created this tall tree from a big limb, stump. And then we put sage in the middle, cedar in the middle for the spirits. And at the top, we have a horsehair tail. Next, please. And there's a close-up. So this is important to me because of Don's mentoring and collaboration, that it would be my first memorial. And I would continue, as you know, probably to make memorial. Even the piece that's at the San Antonio Museum of Art is somewhat of a memorial to the Trail of Tears tribes. And so it would take another 20 years for me to do that work. but Dawn gave me a good kind of beginning. Okay, next, please. Along with that same time in my college career, I was making found art, art from found objects. And this is about an 8-foot by 6-foot tall installation construction, I called it. And so I was becoming more involved with sculptural forms. And I really believe I have this strong feeling that we have to have an affinity with all kinds of art making procedures, methods as artists. It's not tied to just painting or sculpture or performance, video. I think we have to know all these things, printmaking. And so I really was starting to explore other media. So this is a tar paper, rope. It's even a doghouse in the center. They became theatrical. I had a large studio space at KU, kind of large hallway, 40 feet long, and I had worked on either end of the hallway. But with this work, the paintings and sculpture, I applied to the Royal College of Art in London. Okay, next, please. This is the Royal Albert Hall in London, Knightsbridge, Kensington Gardens, and the Royal College of Art is right next to this building, the circular building. And it was really a very important experience for me to travel to London from Wichita, Kansas, and to have an experience living in the middle of South Kensington. A very dynamic time. Francis Bacon was painting in Chelsea. The Sex Pistols, a punk rock group, were beginning. All that they did on Kings Road. And I lived on Fulham Road, a few blocks away from Kings Road. I would see people on the street like Sex Pistols people. And so I was also given some other scholarships at the Royal College of Art to travel across the continent. And I visited collections in Florence, Amsterdam, Belgium, through Switzerland, Italy, the Riviera, Paris. So I'm pretty familiar with those venues. And now I exhibit in Paris, and I have a show in Italy coming up as well. But anyway, having this diversity of experiences was so key to me. And the colonies of the world that are very violently imposed by the British Crown brought many, many people to the UK. And so in an odd way, it was a very great kind of link with other cultures, although it was under the British Crown. The Royal College of Art is the Queen's College. So I was there for a year, and then I went back to Oklahoma. Okay, next, please. This is a photograph from my son, Wookgim, Blue Sky Man, Heap of Birds. He's a photographer and also works at other kind of vocations. He took a photograph from me of this wonderful tree on top of Mount Scott near Anadarko, Oklahoma, southern Oklahoma. And so the landscape of Oklahoma, the trees, the culture was something I didn't have enough affinity with as a young artist. And so I returned from London to soak that up and to learn more in Oklahoma. Okay, next, please. During that summer of '76, I was invited to be a visiting artist at a Cheyenne art festival in Clinton, Oklahoma, where my grandmother lived. And I made a serigraphy demonstration, screen printing. And so this is my grandmother's moccasin pattern that she uses for her artwork. She riffs on this pattern of a woman's moccasin. And so I wanted to kind of keep this image with me. I didn't want to take her actual physical moccasin. So I made a print of it. And I used that for my next movement away from, I guess, the more academic work into more politicized work. Okay, next, please. I went to Philadelphia from Oklahoma in '77, and I was accepted into the Tyler School of Art MFA program to get my Master of Fine Arts degree in painting. And whenever you move, there's also a dynamic kind of shift in your life, and you have to kind of readjust. And it's also kind of a bit abrupt, but it shows you something. So I decided to take my early painting, the little shape in the center, and have it fight my grandmother's beadwork. And I would sort of take this modern art kind of aesthetic shape, almost like Distill from Holland or Frank Stella's work, from New York City. And it didn't have a driving force behind it for me. It was more of an aesthetic expression, although I think the artists do have a force that created it initially. But I wanted to see what I could do to find a politicized, more identity-centered artwork. So they fought each other, and then it became more of an identity quest. Okay, next, please. So here's what came out of that artwork. I did about 5 of those paintings or so. This is one half of a drawing. There's 2 pages, about maybe 10 feet, almost 20 feet across, 6 foot tall. And it's more of a logging in of ideas and identity questions. And there's a teepee with the stars and stripes painted on it from Anadarko. On the top right, that photograph is of the Philadelphia 76ers basketball team. And I was so happy to be able to be in Philly, and tickets were like $5. So it was amazing to go to an NBA game for $5. And I would see Dr. J play. I saw Jabbar play. And that fascination has continued, my enthusiasm. I'm now an Oklahoma City Thunder fan. I've seen tickets for the last 10 years. So basketball. But anyway, all these things are mixed together. So there isn't a limited identity for Native people. It's really part of their whole modern existence and also traditional existence. Okay, next, please. When I finished my MFA, I had a thesis exhibit at Tyler School of Art in Philadelphia. And there could not be any Cheyennes coming to my show. It was so far away. There were probably no Native people attending my exhibit. And that was pretty sad. And I knew that was coming. So I decided to embody the spirit of my family in their names. And so these are die cut kind of cardboard letters you buy. They're red ones. And I wrote about 5 or 4, probably 4 names for my family in the gallery, along with my artwork, my paintings and sculpture. So Helen Crane was my grandmother's maiden name. Lightning Woman, her maiden name is Helen Crane. Many Magpies, as I mentioned, was the chief's name. And so I kind of launched into this whole series of using text in my practice. Next, please. Another great mentor I experienced this time in Philadelphia was Vito Akanchi. And I urge everyone to look him up if you don't know his work. He's really very, very powerful, groundbreaking artist. He's passed also. But I moved back to Oklahoma in the 80s, early 80s from Philadelphia. I was showing in New York. And then I came back to New York. So my life isn't about polemical things like staying in Oklahoma, staying in New York. I go back and forth, monthly if I want to. But of course, the base is Oklahoma. But I hung a piece, which on the back wall deals with Custer's massacre of the Cheyenne Nation. And it's called Death from the Top. And I was hanging this piece on the wall, and I literally backed up and bumped into somebody, and it was Vito Akanchi. So Vito was hanging these mask works, and that's Vito kind of ominously in the dark. But he came and gave a wonderful talk about 3 years before, and gave the talk about sensuality, sexuality, identity, violence, power. He just turned me around and showing us we could do whatever we wanted to do. He caused an upheaval in our graduate program. Some people were very not interested in his practice, but I thought he was a champ, So within 3 years, I would be showing with Vito, so it was really amazing. Okay, next, please. In the early 80s, I did more research about tribal history. And of course, I found that our tribe was brutalized by Custer and the U.S. government. And the massacre, 1878, the Ouachita Massacre in Western Oklahoma. And then after that massacre, they took the leaders of the Cheyenne Nation, prisoners of war, and put them in prison in Florida. And I researched their names and the history. I found a list from Captain Pratt, who was their jailer. And so I made a big painting, 8 by 8 feet. That's me to the right, and I made a big painting called Fort Marion Lizards. I just wrote all the names on the board, and Heap of Birds was how they described my grandfather. And he was at the top of the list by the captain that made the list. And also Little Chief is in the center, lower center, Hockey Abe, and that's my name also. He was also a prisoner of war in Florida. So it became apparent, certainly that we had to have power with language in this country. We could not let someone else define us as they had with changing our names to English. Next, please. Here are the prisoners of war when they first were taken captive and put in a train, and then taken to Fort Marion. Very humid, hot place, very different. They were held hostage, really, so that the tribe would be dominated by the army. There were actually, I think, 3 forts built on our reservation to dominate us after the massacre. One's a federal penitentiary where they had McVeigh, actually, west of Oklahoma City. But very, very troubling time. They killed one chief on the way, and warriors died there as well in Fort Marion. Okay, next, please. So what I find is that America's behavior, the empire, is very brutal, very unfair. And for the capital, for the money, they dominate whoever's in their way. And so here is Guantanamo Bay. They call it Camp X-Ray. And so tonight there are people of color incarcerated with no charges, no trials. Who knows if they live or die? They're totally anonymously kept by the armed forces in Cuba, as were the Fort Marion warriors and chiefs, and brutalized the same way. So the same behavior continues to this day. Okay, next, please. I will return to Oklahoma, of course, and from making that work and be on the lands. My son's photograph again, the Red Rock, very special place. We have a video from this land here at the very end of our talk tonight. It's my mother's ancestral homeland west of Gary, Oklahoma, Arapaho land. Okay, next, please. And again, I'm going back and forth. I'm not staying in Oklahoma. I'm learning about the traditional ways. I'm becoming a Earth Renewal participant. I'm also teaching young children in the public schools, all kinds of children, not just Native children, all kinds of children. But anyway, I was invited by the Public Art Fund of New York City to create work for the first billboard in Times Square in 1982. And my colleagues in that project were Keith Haring, Jenny Holzer, Barbara Kruger, David Hammonds, Hans Haka, Joan Dixon, Billy Sullivan, just the great artists of our time. And we were young and moving with public artwork. So I made this message, and it has 10 different sections. This is one section. Tatistas, which is the Cheyenne tribe, said Viha, spider. And it goes through a series of messages to describe what the white man is to the Cheyenne people. And so that's become a constant premise of my practice, is not to report on myself primarily or Cheyenne people, but to report on the white man and to report back to this empire about what their actions are doing. So because of fences, barbed wire fences, reservations, all the geometry of the rectangles that come across this whole land, roads and property lines, although they hadn't done it yet, the Cheyenne called the white man spider, Viho. And then they would actually carry out these actions that spiders do, wrap things up, trap things. So that's the message at Times Square in 1982. Okay, next, please. In 88, I was asked to come back again to New York, and the Public Art Fund created a series of art pieces in City Hall Park in Lower Manhattan. Mayor Koch was mayor. And so I wanted to create work again about me not being from New York and discuss New York as a theory, I guess, that the real hosts are the Mohawk, not the Dutch, not Mayor Koch. So I made 12 panels and put them up. Well, I attempted to put them up in City Hall Park. 6 were censored by the mayor's office. They would not let all the tribes be deployed in New York. They said there was too many tribes around his office. And so that was very troubling. But I did honor about 6 native tribes from the New York region, and Mohawk was one of them. Okay, next, please. I had an exhibition, I guess 2 years ago in Lower Manhattan by the Whitney Museum, and I reinstalled all 12 panels. And Shinnecock is one, Cayuga, Onondaga, Seneca, Warpo, all these different nations. But I made a circle in the kind of the patio garden area of the gallery. So I was able to come back finally, like 30 years later, to put the work up in New York City. Okay, next, please. That series is called Native Hosts. And so I flipped the name of a state or province backwards to subvert it, but also to show it, to look at its past differently. This is at KU, my alma mater, and they collected, I think 5. I put 5 up on the front lawn of the Spencer Museum, and they are now in the collection. And they may be permanently on the lawn or in and out of the museum. Next, please. Kickapoo. And then Salt Lake City, I was at the University of Utah. And I also work with certainly community members to make these pieces. Always, I have advisors and so forth. And the students there were very quick to point out to me that there is no Ute word per se. The real name for the nation is Nuchi. And these are Nuchi students and some Navajo students. And so I gave them a sign to put on the front lawn of their American Indian Resource Center. And we had a wonderful dinner and gathering with all the students there in Salt Lake. Okay, next, please. So the first Native Host panel was in New York in '88. And this is probably the most recent one to date now. It's at Crystal Bridges in Arkansas, very famous museum there. I participated in a gallery exhibit that toured America from Crystal Bridges. And then also they commissioned me to make 7 panels, tribal panels on their kind of a nature walk. It's very nice in the woods near the museum. And so this text, again, cautions or advises Arkansas to look back at their past. And they would see in Cheyenne language a word that would discuss all the native tribes that are being acknowledged, indigenous tribes. Okay, next, please. And earlier in the 90s, I'd created a series also for the University of Oklahoma. This is the Jacobson House where the Kiowa 5, Kiowa 6 had lived, and it's also now a native-run gallery on the campus. And so, as you might know, in a very offensive, totally offensive way, the University of Oklahoma and Oklahoma State, the state itself, considered itself the Sooners because they actually stole the land before they were supposed to steal it on the land run. You might remember the land run with covered wagons and horses and whatnot. So I run the Sooners back the other direction, back to St. Louis, and turn their name around backwards. And I had all the professors that are native. I made a sign for each professor. So that's my sign, Cheyenne. Next, please. I also enjoy working in the Caribbean and the tropics, certainly all over the world, but I was invited to go and work in St. Croix, Virgin Islands. And so there, I wanted to acknowledge the Taino, and I made about 6 panels of tribal people from the Virgin Islands historically. And I wanted to really challenge the cruise ship tourists that come to these tropical waters with no care for tribal people. It's always about just about their pleasure. So Taino is the host there. Next, please. While I was there in Croy, I was asked to speak at the legislature, the state legislature for the Virgin Islands, and that was in St. Thomas. And I met many wonderful leaders, indigenous leaders from the Virgin Islands, and we spoke and gave talks all day on American Independence Day. I mean, on the African Independence Day in St. Thomas. Next, please. So very often I meet with tribal leaders, indigenous people, but also I engage with the land, with the sea, with the sky. I did a large project with the museum in Anchorage, and they collected, I think, 20 panels, which dealt with all the nations, tribal nations of Alaska. Okay, next, please. And there I took time off to go up the Sound south of Anchorage to visit about a 3-hour boat trip to the glacier. And it was one of the most wonderful days I've ever experienced. And I got to go to the end of the Sound and reach this glacier by water. And the blue ice with maybe millions of years of time. So really wonderful to be able to interact with this ice. And they brought some of the ice on board of the ship, and you're able to bless yourself with that ice. So the water is the most important element we have in our lives, and to have that ancient water was so great to have that experience. Okay, next, please. Other experiences I had that are very remarkable to me are being in Africa. And I worked in South Africa. I had a studio in Cape Town at a art center called Greatmore Studios, wonderful artist-run center in Woodstock area of Cape Town. I also traveled to Zimbabwe, to Harare, and I gave a talk at the National Gallery of Zimbabwe in Harare. And I also traveled to Bulawayo, and I looked at rock art in the caves of Bulawayo in the bush, and then Victoria Falls, Wenge National Park. But in near Bulawayo, I got to visit the Great Zimbabwe, which is an ancient city, the largest structure below the Sahara, and a stone city. And there they have the Zimbabwean Eagle on the left, stone eagle, which actually is the hallmark or the namesake of Zimbabwe. It's on the tail of the Air Zimbabwean jets, but it's a historical legacy of the eagle that came out of the rivers. And on the right, we have the Cheyenne Eagle from a shield. And so within Native life, I have to say that there is racism with some Native people that are indigenous toward African American citizens. And so within America, we have a lot of disruption with poverty. And so many people of color fight over who's the last person on the rung of the ladder, and there's conflict. And so there's also mixtures of blood, and then there's a hierarchy of who's more Indian than someone else and all those kind of things, which is not fair. So anyway, this project was to unite the Eagles from Africa and Oklahoma. It was called Eagles Speak at the Risley Museum in Providence, Rhode Island. Okay, next, please. And there I brought together 4 artists, 3 artists and myself. We have Cynthia Ross Meeks, who is Wampanoag. She's not in this photograph, sadly enough, but Cynthia Ross Meeks, Wampanoag and African American. Tall Oak Everett Whedon in the center, African American, Narragansett. And then on the far right, Thimbegosi Goniwe, who is from Cape Town, the township of Cape Town, and myself. So we did artwork together, and they all did individual pieces, and then we did a group show together called Eagles Speak, and we got along very well. We learned from each other, and we actually worked with Narragansett children also on the reservation. And then we took all the work back to South Africa, and I showed it in a museum in Cape Town, and the children's work as well. And so that was a wonderful exhibit called Eagles Speak. Okay, next, please. Here are the trees from Oklahoma. The juniper trees are called cedars, but they're really junipers. And so that shape is something very iconic to me. I lived on the reservation for 10 years on 500 acres of land, many years without water, running water or a bathroom or a road or electricity. And I just had a lot of experiences that taught me from the land, and the trees were very important. Okay, next, please. These paintings came from the land, from that experience. It began in like 82, and I call them the Nerf Series. The first one was 8 by 10 inches, and they go up to 7 by 9 feet. And in between, this is about 4 foot or so. So the trees, if you look at the shape of the tree and you turn it on the side, you might find these forms, and they're built like a sculpture. There's one layer goes on top of another layer, and so it's just kind of a gradual progression of forms and obscuring other forms behind it, and then a movement from left to right. And it came from my dogs running, and I was thinking in a mindset, or the quail flying as we hunted, or clouds in the sky. I had a vista of the whole 360 on top of this canyon. So it was very informative, although it was subliminal again. It wasn't something I was really aware of. I was just painting. Next, please. And I continued to travel the earth and enrich myself from the land, the sea. This is a volcano in Bali, and I've worked extensively in Indonesia, Java, Sumatra, Bali, Lombok. We taught some in Java and Bandung, my wife and I. So this is actually a volcano above the clouds, and I'm in Lombok looking back. I'm snorkeling in the ocean and seeing this wonderful side of this volcano. Okay, next, please. About 4 years ago, I was invited to be an artist in residence in Singapore, and then I traveled on my own from Singapore to Sumatra, and I wanted to find the elders and weavers in a place called, from the Batak tribe, Lake Toba. And Lake Toba is the largest volcanic eruption on Earth, next to Yellowstone. And so what's left is this huge lake with a cone of volcanic cone in the center. So I lived on the lake for days, and I traveled and met weavers. This is an elder who just a brilliant weaver, and exchanged ideas with the elders, and I collected weaving also from their practice. Okay, next, please. And so in traveling to those sites I'm in Hawaii every year. I do printmaking there in Manoa, and I'm going to be in Kona in about a month. But the reef has been so important to me. I spent many months in Australia off the Great Barrier Reef working with Aboriginal artists in Sydney and Adelaide. And the fish and the coral, again, as a subliminal inspiration of buoyancy and movement, and the shape similar to my painting. So I'm fascinated with snorkeling and watching these pass by, or I could be in the Caribbean again, and in Mexico, and watching these fish and the coral. Okay, next, please. Another Nuf painting. A lot of blues and greens here, and then I'm painting now on wooden pan. This is canvas, like 3 by 4 feet. Now I'm painting on wooden small panels as well. Next, please. This is the Lanai, Turtle Bay, Oahu, and I travel with my family very often, and so I take my small, like 12 by 16 inch wood panels with me, and I paint on the Lanai, the back porch. I painted in the Dominican Republic. I painted in Cozumel, Cancun, Hawaii. I'll be painting in Kona, as I said, in about a month. And so I limit myself to blues when I'm on the tropics. And it's an exercise in not using so much white paint to make a figure ground relationship. And so I really enjoy in the morning to spend time with these canvases, whether wood panels, as part of my art practice. Okay, next, please. That's a Nerf painting. That's 79 by 105 size, and it was collected by the St. Louis Museum of Art. I recently did a big project with them for the Native American gallery, but this is the contemporary art gallery in the museum. And I was really very privileged to be able to exhibit with Joan Mitchell and Bryce Martin in the gallery. Okay, next, please. And that's a Bryce Martin on the right. And so it was wonderful to have that opportunity to have the work, I don't know, compared or linked with a great painter like Bryce Martin and Joan Mitchell. Joan Mitchell, kind of very expressive shapes like my shapes as well. Next, please. The earth, again, is so crucial to what I make, and this is a medicine wheel diagram, and those paintings come from the earth. This diagram shows you, it's a 50-foot circle on the mountain west of Sheridan, Bighorn Mountains, and it shows you a scientific observatory of astronomy, regal, cirrus, summer solstice, sunrise, sunset. And so I made a major sculpture for the Denver Art Museum that had these same defined lines of what's above us on this planet. Okay, next, please. So on the right is the same diagram of stones on the earth, taken from the top, looking down. On the left is our ceremonial Earth Renewal Lodge, which these are built from Oklahoma all the way into Manitoba, Alberta. And on the east face, the Rocky Mountains, all the tribes that are present there have the similar religion. And so if you took the top rafters of the left lodge, it would echo all the lines on the stones on the ground on the right. And so I created a sculpture called Wheel that had this as its guidance. And I'm an instructor in the ceremony in that lodge, which happens solstice, summer solstice. Okay, next, please. Oh, there is Wheel in front of the Denver Art Museum. And each tree is 12 feet tall, and there's a 4-foot base underneath the ground. The theme of the piece is what they might call prehistory, going forward into contact with the white man, peace, then later wars, reservation, massacres, and poverty, and then coming forward with education and empowerment, and then coming back to that prehistory in ceremony. And it's very complicated, but you can probably read about it. And we're moving the sculpture to the front of the museum, so it's more to the left and back to a larger section of land. And I've asked them, which they've done, they've taken 1 foot of this earth that the sculpture was on for 10 years, and they're relocating that to the new site. So all the prayers and tears from the Sand Creek Massacre that were offered on this land for all those years will be acknowledged as we move it to the new site, which may be in a couple of years. Okay, next, please. A big part of all this knowledge, certainly, is its importance is to transmit it. It's impotent without the transmission. So here I am in Denver about 3 years ago in the winter, and I'm with my daughter, Lightning Woman, Desba, Lightning Woman Heap of Birds, and I'm explaining many magpies to her. And those are magpie birds flying on the sculpture that I drew. And this is porcelain and steel and put onto an armature. And so it's about being able to transmit this knowledge. And I've been there with Shannon Rapp with children doing workshops. And so it's had a lot of good use, I think, and will continue to do so when it's going to be reinstalled in a couple of years. Next, please. Again, you'll see the echo of the sculpture in this poster. And I was a visiting artist in Beijing, and I gave a talk at Beijing Normal University. And one of the students in graphic design made this wonderful poster for me for my visit, and I'm just so proud of her work. In my lecture, I had to talk about Tiananmen Square, though. The next slide, please. And so this is a piece I made in '89, and it was under the direction of a curator out of Chinatown in New York City, an Asian curator, Robert Lee. And we had a big series of works created to acknowledge Tiananmen Square. But as they brought out the Statue of Liberty, the Chinese students, I was taken aback, because certainly the Statue of Liberty had its back facing all the Indians. The Statue of Liberty invites everyone to come to a land they do not own, but they're asking everyone to come and partake in this nation we've been in for 20,000 years. So I just presented this message, don't believe Miss Liberty, but I gave it to the Chinese in my visit in Beijing, this thought. Okay, next, please. I work on the reservation with elders, Cheyenne Nation Reservation in Oklahoma. And one of the most memorable days was an art making activity with a medicine wheel. And you have the wheel there being held up on a canvas, acrylic paint. And the group there on the tribe, called Respect Program, they deal with elders and youth and health issues too. They assembled 250 Cheyenne Nation elders for me to help them make medicine wheel paintings. And then we had a dinner together. We had drums there. My mother was there. My sister was there. So it was just an amazing day. And I've done a couple of those events with almost the whole tribe together. It's like wonderful. And we talked about the medicine wheel and made paintings about the medicine wheel. Okay, next, please. Another echo of the wheel is this round dance with moccasins. And I have a piece up right now at the St. Louis Museum of Art. And it deals with archived moccasins from the Cheyenne Nation, Cheyenne Nation, and they're dancing in a circle. And they asked me to use their collection and then create a installation. But what I wanted to do was to really, really talk about the violence on our reservation, still perpetrated by the white man, the white police, and the Red Lives Matter. Certainly, and we have struggled with that, with police violence on my reservation. Okay, next, please. So what I have done is to get the newspaper from our tribal government. It's called the Cheyenne Nation Bulletin. And I selected articles from the newspaper. Here we are making a kind of a maquette for the installation. Next, please. And then in my studio in Oklahoma City, I put all the articles up on the wall. And then later we would scan them from high res files from the newspaper editor. And then we would create a kind of a large poster form on the back, projected through the plexiglass. And then we'd have the moccasins on another armature suspended in front of the piece. And there were 3 particular murders that I have a lot of affinity and sadness about. There was a young child who was beat up and thrown against the wall as she was in foster care with a non-native mother. And then another particular one that's of reference is Mahavist, Good Blanket. Move the next slide, please. That's Mahavist, Good Blanket. He was a young man in Clinton, Oklahoma, and he had some mental issues, as I understand it, perhaps bipolar. And they called the police to come help them, the family. And instead of helping them, the Clinton, Oklahoma white police shot him like 8 times in the kitchen and killed him. And his father is a Good Blanket, and he and I are colleagues. We danced together in the earth renewal ceremony, and I met this young man in the teepee. And so it's very sad and very violent. And the police that killed him got awards from the city government after they killed him. Next, please. So that's what is underneath the moccasins are these stories, but also happy stories about birthdays and graduations and other events. But rarely do we see the violence that America perpetrates to this day on Native people, and it's devastating. And so this is up for maybe like 3 years at the St. Louis Museum of Art. And I hope to bring this back to Oklahoma or to have it installed permanently in a museum. But Oklahoma would be great to have this returned, and we could have new moccasins, or found, but we use the same newspaper articles as well. Okay, next, please. That kind of misery and tragedy, it's important to kind of keep that information flowing, that it's been a very tragic story for Native people in this continent. And the Trail of Tears, I placed these panels, these are like no parking signs, in Atlanta. I made about 10 sets, and I had an exhibit at the Atlanta College of Art, and I put them on Peachtree Street in Atlanta, downtown. And my premise was sort of a tongue-in-cheek thought of it's like no parking. So in a sense, for all the non-natives, your time's up. You should move your car, move everything off this land. And I put them on the street, just like no parking signs. And these are, I believe these were at the San Antonio Museum of Art. There are about 10 sets. Okay, next, please. And activism or support for the community is so important. You can't demand everything be done for you, certainly. And so when I was back for the first few years in Oklahoma, I fostered a new collaborative group called Makers Alliance. So on the far left, Richard Ray Whitman, photographer, poet. Next to him, his brother, Joe Dale Tate Nevakoya. Center, Shan Goshorn, who has passed a couple of years ago. And next to her, Patricia Mouthshell Russell, Cheyenne priestess. Shan is a photographer, painter, weaver, and then myself. So this was our group, and we taught together, we lectured together, help each other. Yuchi, Comanche, Cherokee, Cheyenne, Arapaho, and women, 2 women. Again, there's always this neglect for women leading, to be allowed to lead in contemporary society when they're really instrumental in leading traditionally. So I made it a point to ask 2 women to join us. Okay, next, please. And I edited a book called Makers, with poetry, photography, traditional stories, which was published here in Oklahoma. Okay, next, please. I also work with youth, as I mentioned before. This is a recent project, probably about 3 years ago in the summer at the University of South Dakota. And it was a wonderful art camp. I was there for about 5 days, and I worked with primarily high school students, Native high school students, and we made yard signs, temporary signs that they initiated, they designed, and then I fabricated them. And they can make a message about whatever they wanted. And I talked about my work and showed them my work, and then they made their own presentations. Okay, next, please. And there's some of them. We made about a 50-foot circle in front of the art school. And I believe these are double-sided panels, and now their work is touring in an exhibition, and these signs are touring as well from the University of South Dakota. Okay, next, please.
Edgar, though I personally do not mind, I do want to make everyone aware that it is now 7 o'clock. And so we will be getting to these questions fairly soon. And I just, before we leave, folks start leaving, I am acknowledging the time. Thank you. Yeah.
Okay, next slide. I really like the work that they've done, all these wonderful messages. Okay, next. A Navajo student did this piece. Next, please. And the more recent voting message here too, I created a national voting message. Okay, next, please. Also a billboard that's up in Fresno, California about foreigners making immigration laws. Next, please. And Art in America, I did the cover of Art in America and turned America backwards and said, "Do not dance for pay." Talking about Native artists being more critical of American society. Okay, next, please. And then a graduation diploma from Tyler School of Art as a serigraph. Next, please. And all the students getting their graduate diplomas there. Okay, next. And printmaking with my printer, Michael McCabe in Santa Fe. Okay, next. We'll go through a couple of the prints now. Okay, next, please. This is a New York City active shooter Custer PS1. And you can go to my website and see a lot of these prints as well. Okay, next, please. And they're primary prints and also ghost prints as well. Next, please. That's a ghost print. Okay, next. Fort Supply about Custer's actions on a reservation. Next, please. And a piece about health. Health of the people's the highest law. Okay, next. And that's what they call you if you have a lot of trips to the plaz, bonus veins. Okay, next, please. And about songs, some powwow songs, lyrics from songs. Okay, next, please. And Columbus Day, a series on Columbus and the Dominican Republic. Next. And I'll just give you a couple of more, and then we'll go to the video real quick. Okay, next, please. And next. And this is called Water is Your Only Medicine. And it's about the preciousness of water. Okay, next. Next, please. And about immigration. Why is immigration dictated by foreigners? Okay, next. All right. Next, please. And natives survive in spite of the empire. It's what we really have determined. Certainly, we'll survive. Okay, next, please. We survive with the spiritual nature of sage and my family. Is the next slide. Shanna catching people birds and Lightning Woman and myself.
Okay, well, that wraps up our lecture with Edgar Heap of Birds. Thank you so much for those that decided to stay.